How prepared is Iran today militarily compared to the 12-day war?
Compared to the last time, it's substantially more. In fact, there's lots of reports that in the aftermath of that there was a lot of purges within Iran. They were looking for all these spies because apparently there was quite a few insiders that helped knock out some of the air defenses, et cetera, taking down some of the radars and doing other things that would limit their ability to respond immediately. They got a lot of that fixed after about the first 12 hours, and things changed after that. And certainly their offensive capability only increased in percentages of success over the time because they figured out what was going on, some of the cyber attacks, and they took mitigation against those. Now then, the surprise that you had then is gone because they are actively looking for that. So you're not going to get, I doubt, unless Mossad is even better than I think they are. I doubt you're going to get that where prior to an attack that you're going to get another one of those rounds from the inside where they take things out with drones and whatever else, like the spiderweb attack in Ukraine, et cetera. So I think that Iran is now, as you said a second ago, they read the tea leaves. They see the writing on the wall. They are focused very strongly. So they're looking for that kind of thing. They now know, because of that history, what the attack might look like and how to mitigate some of the effects of it. And they also are prepared for how to respond more quickly, I think, offensively. So I think they are far more capable right now. And from all we can understand after the first attack, much of their missile production capacity had already foreseen this possibility of this war. So it was already in protected areas, and it continued to produce even during that time. And now all the months since June of last year, we can imagine that their production capacity has probably continued on and probably accelerated to the extent that they could get the resources and the supplies, et cetera. I think that their missile capacity of the kind that succeeds will be higher. So I think the pain on Israel will be higher. Their ability to strike us if they pull off the restraints will be substantial, and this could be really, really ugly. If President Trump thinks this is going to be like June, where we can just go in there and do whatever we want, or like Venezuela, which I worry that, catastrophic success, he may get the idea that what he says in public, which he said at Davos earlier today, we're always right and everything we do succeeds. If you believe that and you ignore some of these fundamentals we just talked about here, you can make a catastrophic decision. And I really hope that doesn't happen.
You mentioned Maduro. Is it possible that we see a more limited strike like we saw in Venezuela, or more limited operation to capture the leader, for example? It sounds very difficult, if not impossible, in Iran, considering their military capabilities and how prepared they are. But we know that there's reports that Delta Force and Navy SEALs are in the region. Is that even a possibility?
I mean, anything's a possibility. Some people can think that, well, we did it there and we can do it here. And, that's part of our skill set that we train for on a regular basis, which is why they used Delta Force the first time. But I think that the chances of success are virtually zero. And I certainly hope they don't attempt to do that for the very reason you just mentioned, is that it's just been done. You've already tried, you have assassinated, several other leaders already. The Hezbollah leader I mentioned, Nasrallah. So there is history recently too. So they know that that's a legitimate possibility. And you had Jack Keane yesterday saying, yeah, we're going to go after political targets. I don't know that would mean anything besides the Ayatollah or the president. So I think that they're going to be prepared for that. And they definitely have the defenses much better than Maduro had. Maduro was foolish. I mean, he was, out dancing in the streets, out in the open in the days ahead of this, mocking President Trump. You don't see the Ayatollah doing that. He's very cognizant of the threat and the reality. And I'm sure that they're taking much more precautions than Maduro did.
He's also too old for this shit. He can't be bothered playing these games like Maduro. The guy's 80-something years old. He's been through so much. What happens in the region? What happens to Lebanon, to Hezbollah? What happens to the Houthis? Obviously, Hamas, they don't have much capacity left. Do you worry that this could spill over? We see what the clashes that are happening in Syria. Or is Iran and their proxies just too weak for this to become a regional issue?
Well, they would depend on how successful Iran was in their retaliation. If they start hitting Israel and they start getting weakened, and I mean genuinely hurt, not just some pain points, but some punishing losses to where their offensive capacity is diminished, then you might get some people rising up in the Houthis or in Hezbollah, because most of those guys still exist. They've gone to ground for very rational and self-preservation reasons. But if they saw that suddenly Israel was starting to really be hurt and they couldn't stop Iranian attacks and missiles, I can see the possibility that they could stand up there. You also can't just eliminate the possibility that Turkey could be sitting there going, here's an opportunity here, because there's a lot of enmity between Turkey and Israel already, and that has been growing in recent months. I don't know that they would be ready to take any action right now, because they have the possibility of nuclear weapons all over the place. That's actually something that I worry about is if Iranian has catastrophic success, as some call it, and they really do start hurting Israel, that you have the risk that Israel could be saying, okay, well, I'm going to correct this situation with a nuclear weapon. That's, to me, a bigger threat than what you're talking about, a regional war against Israel, is that Iran is too successful. And I think that they're aware of that risk, and I think that that could mitigate what they do if they start having success. But I think that they will go up to that point. I don't think that they'll back down this time.
Yeah, I think there's people betting on whether Israel will use nuclear weapons this year on Polymarket. Not sure how that's even a discussion. It's pretty crazy. But also, for a lot of people, just don't understand how massive Iran is, not just militarily. Over 93 million people. It's bigger than Iraq. It's about a quarter of the size of the US. It's a massive, massive country. Now, I did speak to an analyst a few days ago, and I want to get your thoughts on this. He made the point that he believes Iran, if therefore the regime falls, it's not going to be too bloody to have a replacement government, as we've seen in Iraq, Libya. It's because in Iraq and Libya, even in Syria, they're melting pots with many hands in the pot. Many proxies deciding who should lead the country, and that led to a split within the nation. And he believes that Iran, being one of those, hands in all these different pots, just like Israel is, just like the US is, Iran will not have a lot less risk of civil war. Is that a risk that we could see civil war in the region? Or do you think a regime change in the country could go better than we saw in Libya, in Iraq, and in Syria?
I don't see any positive outcome. It would be just the height of wishful thinking that you could do that. And I do think it is possible that the U.S. and Israel together could have a decapitation where they take out the Ayatollah. And even though Iran has a continuity of government plan and they have somebody else designated, whether that person would have, number one, they would immediately become a target themselves. But it's also unclear that whoever that person would be, will they have the same kind of support that the current Ayatollah has? And so it is possible that you could get a regime disruption by taking out the leadership, and that there could be a battle inside for it. So, I mean, you saw the 1979 revolution itself right there. So there's certainly precedents inside of Iran that different groups will fight when it comes to it. And I think it's a roll of the dice to hope that doesn't happen again. Maybe this fellow you talked to is right, but I rather think that
I doubt it. Like Daniel,
I would hope he is, just for the people of Iran. But I'm telling you, we can count on the United States and Israel to make sure that doesn't happen. They want it to go violent. They will stir the pot. They will send in provocateurs. They'll do whatever it takes to make sure there is a civil war, in my view, if that happens.
Yeah, I think Israel is more inclined to seek unrest in Iran. They've done it in Syria, and I think one of the spokespeople, right, whether he's a spokesman or just commentator in Israel, made the comment on TV saying, after the strikes in Iran, after the regime change, we'll do the same thing we did in Syria. And in Syria, and Assad fell, within hours, Israel was just striking all their military capability, massive strikes across the country, destroying any capability for Israel, for Syria to have a military. And he said, the same thing could be repeated for Iran. And then you go into just going to give you an idea of how complex the nation is. The ethnic groups there's obviously the Persians, 61%. You got the Azeris, 16%, the Kurds, which we know the Kurds have been resisting and seeking, and they've got all these separatist movements across Turkey, Iraq, Syria. Well, there's 10% of Iran are Kurds. And you've got the Lurs, you've got the Arabs, you've got the Balochs, Turkmens, and other tribes as well, all in one country. And many of them, have their own separatist movements. The Azeris have one, the Kurds, the Balochs have one, the Arabs have one. So anyone that looks at that country of 93 million people, where the regime doesn't have really one main opposition leader, Venezuela has, even Venezuela doesn't really have one, but some people say Maria Machado. Well, I think Maria Machado, one would argue, is not that popular in Venezuela. I still think she's more popular than Reza Pahlavi. He's the
Right.
son of the Shah, but that was decades and decades ago. He's been living abroad. He's been spending a lot of time in Israel. He visited Israel again recently, I think. So while I hope he does well, I hope he has enough movement. We need one opposition leader, whether you like him or not. I don't think there is one for Iran, and that's what really worries me. As much as I dislike the regime, I don't find any alternative that could fill that power vacuum that will be left. And I just think that Iran is going to be a textbook failed regime change, like we've seen time and time again. As you said, I hope I'm wrong, but everything points in that direction.
Well, yeah, and I think, Mario, we have to conclude. I mean, you mentioned that the commentary inside of Israel that they would do the same thing they did in Syria, and I think that is absolutely right. I think you can absolutely count on it. But I think that is their intent, is to have disruption. I think that the Israeli objective in this, as best as I can determine from their actions, is that they don't want a follow-on regime. They don't want, per se, one that's, unless they could literally install someone and everyone would be happy and say, yay, whatever Israel says. I don't think they worry about that or fantasize about that. But they want a failed state, just like in Syria. And if they keep them disrupted on their borders, they perceive, then I think that they say then there will be no coherent threat to us. I think that is dead wrong. I think that is nearly suicidal for the Israeli state. I think that creates chaos and it creates incentive for people to continue to work into perpetuity against you because they see how that you're destroying regimes in the area. And eventually it could cause other regimes to say, that's not going to happen to me. I'd rather work together with somebody else. So I think it's very short-sighted. I don't think it'll work in the long term. And I consider it to be completely immoral.
Daniel, everyone is up in arms in Gaza because if I think about 60,000 people died, 60,000. I can't remember the number, but that's a really large number and that's heartbreaking. I want to remind the audience, since civil war started, and I remember the days when I was watching the regime fall in Syria, I didn't like Assad. I saw all the news. I'm like, man, this guy seems like a horrible leader. I was supporting the movements that were trying to overthrow him, same as Gaddafi. Since that civil war, I was as a young boy then, since that civil war started, the war's ongoing till today. There's clashes between the Syrian government and the Kurdish groups, the Democratic Force, something they call SDF. There's been 650 to 660,000 deaths in Syria. That's deaths, not casualties, deaths, since the civil war started. To give people an idea, when a regime, everyone is really upset at the Iranian regime, and me included, killing 5, 10, 15, 20,000 people in Iran, the alternative could be a lot worse. And that's there's direct deaths from the civil war. That's putting famine aside, poverty aside, the destruction of the institutions, the country itself is just completely annihilated. So if we see a repeat of what Israel did after the fall of Assad in a country like Iran, this is going to be a multi-year, if not multi-decade, downward spiral for the country. Now, there is an alternative that somehow the West does figure out a transition of power process in place. The decapitation strike is very successful because I don't think they'll give up until the regime falls. I don't think there'll be any strike. There is an alternative. Maybe they want to pressure Iran, weaken Iran, and then force them to concede, maybe become more friendly to the West, have a new leader instead of Khamenei, assassinate Khamenei and have a new leader, someone like the vice president of Venezuela, who may be more open to working with the US, and someone less hostile to Israel. Now, that is an option. We might see that succeed. I'm skeptical, but I think it's still a probability worth considering. Fingers crossed that it does happen, that we see something peaceful happen. Well, fingers crossed there's an agreement and there's not even any war. But my next question to you, Daniel, is most of the interviews we did was talking about the war in Ukraine, which is raging on, but with what's happening in Greenland, what happened in Venezuela, what's now happening in Iran, a new war there, the tariff war, tariff this, tariff that. Everyone just forgot about the Ukraine war. People's attention shifts every week as a new story. That war is still ongoing. So what's the latest in Ukraine? And more importantly, what will happen to that war, the biggest war since World War II, the deadliest war since World War II? What will happen in that war if there is a conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran?
Well, I'll take it just on its face value first. While everybody has been paying attention to all these other issues you just mentioned, and there's a bunch of them, Russia has not taken its eye off the ball, and it has continued its relentless assault in the air and on the ground. So everything on the front line has continued to move forward, with the exception of Kupiansk. Ukraine has had some tactical success there and has actually pushed Russia back in a no-kidding, a successful tactical operation so far. But as I said, when this whole operation first started, it's going to be temporary, just like the one in the incursion into Kursk was. The 7-month operation there, it's doomed to failure because they don't have the capacity to sustain that over time. And while they're having some success there, they're losing elsewhere on the front line in the Sumy, in the Kharkiv region, in the Zaporizhia region, and of course still in the Donetsk area. So Russia continues to move forward. After they took the Mirnograd and the Pokrovsk area, they have now continued to move beyond that. They're moving deeper up into Dnipropetrovsk region. Everywhere you want to look, except for Kupiansk, they're still moving to the west and they're still moving backward. Meanwhile, in the air, they're almost completely knocked out with their energy and heating systems in the capital city, in Kharkiv city, in Odessa. I mean, people are literally freezing to death, where you have the capital city. The mayor said, we need people to leave. Just get out of here to find some other place out in the countryside where you can have heating and wood or whatever to stay alive, because they can't provide enough electricity and heating inside. And I have been recently talking just yesterday to a former regime official in the Kiev who's now completely lost faith and trust in Zelensky, because they see firsthand what's happening to their family, to their friends. And they said that there is deep, deep depression mounting among the people. And I think that's what the Russians intended. But that's what's happening behind the scenes in these cities. And because it's bitter, bitter cold, and Russia just continues to relentlessly and monotonously knock out these energy systems. As they try and repair them, they'll knock them out again. And now then you're getting fewer and fewer even hours in a day when there's actually heating. And I think I saw yesterday there's something like 600 apartment buildings in Ukraine are now completely without power, not even temporary, but totally without. And they're trying to figure ways to get that fixed. They have been heroic and just insanely successful in trying to fix all these things with such limited capability. But even the best you can do is shrinking in its effectiveness, and it is having a serious impact on the people. That, of course, is where you get people to go to the front lines. And as you've probably seen the videos that continue to be out there on a nearly daily basis, they still steal people off the ground left and right and send them immediately into the front lines. And majority of them die or they flee. And the number of people that are fleeing from the war, AWOL, desertions, is just a staggering number in the last 12 months, on top of all the killed and wounded. Their medical system is not supportive of this. And at some point, and who knows when that will be, either they're going to finally have a collapse somewhere, and Russia can try and rush some folks in there, or they may just content themselves with trying to limit their risk to their troops and just keep this monotonous, both tactical, operational, and strategic depth of attacks until at some point the Ukraine army will just be ground to dust, or it'll collapse, one or the other. And it's impossible to know which one of those two, but it is certain it's going to be one of those two.
Witkoff is apparently meeting Putin tomorrow, and someone said that someone within the administration, maybe Witkoff himself, said that 90% of the way there in terms of reaching a peace deal. Now, I made a joke I posted earlier today. They've been 90 or 95% since the beginning of negotiations. So I'm not sure what that means. But there's also the invite to Putin to join the board of peace. Not sure what that means and what that changes. Are the two countries closer to a peace agreement? Because it seems the US doesn't really care much about Ukraine anymore. They care more about Iran. They care more, especially about Greenland and Europe. I feel so bad for Europe because now they're just stuck in the middle. They've got to support Ukraine. They've got to buy the equipment from the US, which seems less and less interested in supporting Ukraine. And they've got to fight off. They're fighting off Russia on that front, and they're fighting off potentially, at least now diplomatically, fighting off the US on the Western front with Greenland. What does that mean for Putin and Putin's position on the negotiating table?
Well, listen, I mean, that's a multi-part question there, and really important, because I think that what Putin is doing right now is just saying, man, why don't y'all just keep eating each other? I'll just sit back here and I'm just going to maintain the status quo of my combat operations, both strategically and tactically and operationally here. And we'll just maintain. I'm not going to take any big risks because I don't need to, because you guys are eating each other up and you're falling apart from the inside. He sees what's happening inside of Ukraine, which I just described, but he also sees what's happening in Davos, for example, today. And there was a speech yesterday by Mark Carney, for example, who was pretty bold in his broadside across what Trump is doing. And he's saying we're starting to diversify. We're looking more to China. We're diversifying everywhere else. And we're in the process of basically decoupling from America's hegemonic leadership, which he used that term in his speech. And others, I think, are coming to that same conclusion. You had Merz, 4 or 5 days ago, say maybe it is time for us to talk to Russia. Maloney said the same thing. You're not going to come to an end. They're now starting to say out loud, Europeans, that there's no military solution here to even avoid defeat. We're going to have to get to this point to where we have a negotiated settlement. And that's a pretty bitter pill for them to swallow. But they're starting to see the reality that you and I are talking about here and have been for a long time. And so Russia will just let that play out. And then this whole thing with Greenland is just like a Christmas gift come late, because he sees that, we're eating each other up on that. And there's actually a possibility, at least theoretically, of a military clash on Greenland. I doubt that that's going to come to that, because I don't think that the Europeans will allow it to get that far. I think they would submit before they would actually come into an armed clash with the U.S. But that's also bad, because that will facilitate the fracture of NATO and maybe its death knell. That also would make Putin very happy. So I think he's content to just sit there and watch it. And if you guys want to come to me and have a negotiated settlement, I think he would still do it, because it's in his interest to have this with what we would call an ugly deal in the West. Is still less than the maximalist on the Russians, which they will take eventually militarily if we don't agree to any kind of a negotiated settlement. So all that together is good for Russia. And I think that they're going to succeed both strategically and tactically and militarily. And it's bad for Europe. And the United States is not helping its case in any of these. And I'm telling you, we could get to a Gulliver situation with the U.S. to where, however big and strong and powerful we are, if we take on one too many problems in all these different places, we could find ourselves in real world hurt.